Genuine evil born into this world leaves behind a traceable mark, allowing it to come back once it dies in the form of something even more sinister. 56-year-old Weston B. Mills, who was 6'1", 250 pounds, and hair as dark as the soul he was about to encounter, stepped down off the combine to check what had got stuck in the blades, thinking he was alone in the field that night in Cardington, Ohio, 1979. Before stepping down, he flipped on the lights as dusk had just settled in, when he heard a strange voice behind him say his name. He spun around, not believing what stood before him. Years later, he confided in his family, telling them the events that took place that night. "Who the hell said that?" I asked out loud, thinking someone was just messing with me as I quickly spun around, expecting to see one of my friends. I staggered back, falling onto the combine's tire, then onto the ground, not believing what was standing there. The light of the combine was on something hidden in the trees about 20 feet away. Something I've only read about in books, and dare not utter out loud what I think it was. I don't remember gaining my composure or standing up, but as I did, it started moving like it was going to come at me. "Shit, I'm in the farthest field," I mumbled to myself as I stared at it, thinking what to do next, as adrenaline surged through me. I was at least 2 miles from the farmhouse and knew if I didn't get away, this was going to be my last day on Earth. Between me and the farmhouse was the horse stable and several patches of thick trees. My first instinct was to run to the stable, as there were things there I could use as weapons. I put one foot behind me, then the other, as I slowly started backing away from it. My thought was to make it to the back of the combine so I could take cover in the corn as I ran towards the stable. Before turning to run, I hesitated momentarily, waiting to see what it was going to do when it took a step towards me. Without thinking, I flipped around, going straight into the corn. Lucky for me, the corn was dry, and I could also see above it. The weather vane was easy to spot on top of the stable against the stars as I sprinted along. I made that my focus, knowing if I slowed down or fell, it might be the last mistake I ever make. I actually surprised myself by how fast I was going, even with having my work boots on. When I hit an open patch that was void of corn, it went quiet, except for the rustling of dry husks behind me. By the sounds of it, I'd say the thing was about 50 to 60 yards away. I knew from the clear patch to the stable it was another couple hundred yards. I ran track in high school and knew to stay focused and control my breathing. When I cleared the corn, the stable couldn't have been more than 50 feet away. The horses were running around, whinnying, acting like they knew something was wrong, as I hurdled the fence. My first instinct was to grab the pitchfork as I ran over to the wall it hung on, quickly removing it, then turning around as I backed myself up into the corner. With each passing second, the horses became more and more hysterical, and I knew it had to be close. Without warning, the horses suddenly ceased moving or making noise. It was almost like they were dead, but were still standing. What kind of god would create such a thing? I whispered under my breath, clutching the pitchfork, waiting for it to show itself. Right then, something grabbed a hold of my left ankle, and before I could look down to see what it was, I was ripped through the side of the stable as I flew through the air, hitting the ground about 30 yards away. As I lay there gazing up at the night sky, the wind knocked out of me. I couldn't believe I still had a tight grip on the pitchfork. I was shocked a man of my size could be ripped through the stable wall, then easily tossed that far. It was obvious I was nothing compared to the thing that threw me like I was a rag doll. I then heard the corn husk rustling again, and in that split second I raised the pitchfork up in a defensive position as it leaped on me. It snarled as it slid down on the tines, sinking into its flesh. It got mere inches from me as its horrid breath engulfed my face, its saliva trickling down onto my cheek as I turned my head. Still holding the pitchfork, I struggled as I quickly tried moving it to the side. It was extremely heavy and didn't want it getting any closer to me. Once it was clear, I immediately sprang to my feet, about to run when it said, "Weston, wait." I then paused, asking in disbelief, "How the hell do you know my name?" There was a brief silence before it replied, "I know you. I've been watching you for longer than you can imagine. I knew the day would come when I've had enough, but it must be someone specific to end me. Only that person can send me to whatever dark abyss awaits me next." "What are you talking about? What are you?" I asked. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but I'm going to anyway. I was born Gilles de Rais in 1405 in Anjou, France. From a young age, I knew something was wrong with me. My thoughts were always morbid, and I reveled in the suffering of others. It wasn't until I was 32 before I acted on my desires, brutally killing the first child. I didn't have the gall until then, even though it had consumed my thoughts for many years. After I'd gotten a taste, the bloodlust overtook me, and an insatiable, uncontrollable hunger consumed me. I became a beast of sorts. The first child I found was almost by accident. It was late one night, midsummer, and I just left the house of my cousin George after several days of eating and heavy drinking. I was still somewhat drunk from all the wine, which ended up giving me the courage to do what I did. I was stumbling along an empty cobble street when I saw a young girl, probably the age of 7, and homeless by the looks of it, digging through the rubbish of a pub, looking for her next meal. She saw me coming, got startled, and was about to rabbit away when I smiled, confidently saying as I extended my hand, "Fear not, child. If it's food you want, I have plenty at my residence, and shall even show you the Black Tower where I was born." She didn't hesitate long before reaching out and taking my hand as I led her back to Chateau de Race. I won't get into the gruesome details over what proceeded the following days. Something monstrous was unleashed inside me, though. Over the next several years, I enlisted the help of several of my servants to bring children to me to try and satisfy an uncontrollable thirst that could never be quenched. I knew one day I'd be caught, but I simply didn't care. When I was put to death by hanging, I was told I murdered 140 children, possibly more. Strangely enough, I only remember the first and the last. A month before I got caught, it had been several weeks since the last one, due to an uprising of fear in the surrounding towns regarding children going missing without a trace. My servant John was afraid to take any more from towns he'd already visited, so I told him to make the journey further out, which was a few days' ride. He agreed, and while I awaited his return, I almost took my own life because I couldn't stave off whatever the beast was I created inside me. I lost my mind as I tore the house to shreds. Upon his return, I imagined I was unrecognizable. As he and the child walked inside to see me standing by the fireplace, the expressions on their faces are burned in my memory for all eternity. Jean was frightened and immediately left the house, locking the door behind him. We never saw each other again until the day we were both hanged. I remember every detail over those next few days, but it was also like living in a very lucid dream, as I become something so dark and evil even I didn't recognize myself anymore. When the soldiers raided Chateau de Race, it looked as if the rooms had been bathed in blood. As I entered the Black Tower and found me sitting in my chair covered in blood, none of them wanted to touch me, let alone arrest me. It wasn't until the lead soldier ordered the men to take me into custody did they finally do it. As I was escorted out, men were crossing themselves, while others were vomiting from the horrors I'd left on display. As I stood there at the gallows pole, the rope around my neck, I felt relieved it was all over, but had no idea what was about to happen next. I knew I was headed to hell, but not in the way I'd imagined it. The last thing I remember before waking up in a forest in a distant land was the sound of my neck snapping as my body pulled the rope tight. When I opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong with me. I remembered everything, but was no longer Gil de Race. I was the beast you see before you now. I had no answers, only questions, and for the longest time I stayed as far away from people as I could, until one day the bloodlust came back and overtook me again. This time I'm able to control it for longer periods, but it must be indulged or I experience pain like you couldn't possibly fathom. Over the centuries, I've come across others like myself, each one a different whore, or beast if you will. People question where myths about creatures like us begin. Now you know. Genuine evil born into this world leaves behind a traceable mark, allowing it to come back once it dies in the form of something even more sinister. We've been called the Unforgiven ones, and it's been said Lucifer himself won't have us. We're brought back as hideous creatures, cursed to roam the earth forever, unless we meet the one who can end it for us. I knew you were the one the moment I laid eyes on you, but you were too young at the time. I've been waiting decades for this night. Waiting. Ever patiently waiting. I've seen evil in every form. Empires rise and fall. The mass genocide of entire civilizations. For nothing. Whatever darkness awaits me next, I welcome its dire embrace. Make sure no one finds my body. Burn it before burying it, if you must. End me now, before I end you, it said, snarling as it sprang to its feet. Without thinking, I thrust the pitchfork into it as hard as I could, over and over, as its screams echoed through the hot summer air. It finally collapsed onto the ground, closed its eyes, and took its last breath. I stood there for quite some time just staring at it, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I'd always been indifferent to these sorts of things, never giving any of it much thought. I wasn't taking any chances and did as it instructed. I grabbed a bunch of wood that was next to the stable, made a roaring fire, and burned it until there wasn't much left. I then spent the rest of the night finding and burying it in a spot deep enough that will hopefully never get disturbed, at least in my lifetime. I never uttered a word of it to anyone for obvious reasons, but felt compelled to do so before I leave this life. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.